Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 68 of Literacy in Color. Today on Literacy in Color, I'm joined by two literacy legends, Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter, founding partners at Readsters. Linda and Michael are nationally recognized literacy experts who have spent more than 40 years improving early reading education using effective, evidence-based practices. As former national letters trainers, they've worked in scores of schools across the United States, supporting teachers in both early grade classrooms and upper elementary grades to understand how reading develops and how to deliver instruction that truly works for readers who struggle. Their consulting work focuses not only on helping teachers use data as the basis for instruction, but also on modeling effective lessons directly with students, something they consider the most important part of their work. They're known for their clarity, practicality, and their ability to make complex reading science actionable for every educator. In addition to co-authoring widely used foundational reading curricula and diagnostic decoding assessments, Linda and Michael are both beloved national speakers. And in this powerful conversation, Linda and Michael help us unpack what truly effective intervention looks like for older students who struggle with foundational reading skills. Drawing from decades of direct work with students, in fact, from age 4.5 to 81, Linda and Michael explain why so many older learners slip through the cracks, how to diagnose the real source of breakdown, and why age has nothing to do with a person's potential to learn to read. In fact, it's never too late. They share their insights and expertise about decoding, phonological awareness, instructional pacing, motivation, error analysis, working memory, and why intervention for older learners must be rooted in patience and respect. I am truly honored to welcome Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter to the show, and this episode is one that every reading interventionist, literacy coach, special educator, and administrator should hear. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I feel very grateful to be joined by two well-renowned literacy experts, Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter of Readsters. And they have been in the structured literacy landscape for decades and have over 40 years of experience supporting readers, especially those who struggle. And today we're going to be chatting about what effective intervention can look like for older learners who are still struggling with foundational skills. So first of all, just a warm welcome to the show, Michael and Linda. Thank you so much for joining me today.
So
Our
happy to be
pleasure.
here.
Wonderful. Would you take a moment just to briefly introduce yourselves and share a bit about the work you do with Readsters?
Well, Michael and I work primarily with struggling readers and primarily on the decoding side, on the word recognition side, although we work also on the language side. We got into this in an interesting way. Michael was head of a concrete construction company, and I was an investment banker. We both lived in Washington, D.C., and we both volunteered to teach adults how to read at the Washington Literacy Council. These were adults who spoke English. They were not English language learners, and they hadn't learned to read in whatever school system they came up in, mostly in the DC school system. Michael, you want to take it from there?
Well, Linda and I met at a meeting of frustrated tutors because the program they gave us to use wasn't working. And there was a group of tutors recognized that it was the problem with the tutors and the program, not with the students. And we met to try to figure out what we were going to do about that. And that was the first time I met Linda. And we were two people who had tried to find other things and were bouncing ideas off of each other. And that's kind of how we got started. From there, we were fortunate enough to find the Wilson reading system and met Barbara Wilson, which we did bring into the council and was our first step towards success with the adult non-readers. And through Barbara, Linda met Louisa Moats, who many of your listeners may know by name as one of the leading researchers at the time in the world of reading. We didn't even know there was a world of reading and that there was reading research out there. We were just trying to find our way to our adult non-readers. Once we met Louisa became our mentor, and that's how we got plugged into the science of reading, the world of research on reading, and she also set us off on our careers in reading.
And one thing I do want to say is that Wilson was such a good place for us to start because it really taught us the rules of phonics, and it was excellent for that. Wilson also, at that time, was new, and it stated real clearly that if you don't have phonological awareness, this is not going to work. And our adults did not have phonological awareness. So unfortunately, Wilson only worked with about 1 out of 5 of our students. And fortunately, we met Louisa, and she pointed us in the direction of Linnemood Bells, and we learned about the importance of phonological awareness. And then through phonographics, learned about the importance of speech to print. All this was just when we were in the business world trying to help our adults as volunteers. And what we found is that once we incorporated phonemic awareness into the Wilson lessons, oh man, it made such a difference. We had many more adults succeeding. And that's how we got into this. And there's a whole bunch more, but I think that's enough.
That's incredible. I love that backstory. And what a beautiful story to have gone on this journey and trying to support illiterate adults trying to become readers and finding kind of that secret sauce of what actually works. And phonics alone wasn't cutting it. And you really figured out how to address the deficits in being able to make literacy happen in their lives. And when we think about this current landscape of teachers trying to make an impact in evidence-based instruction, structured literacy, teaching the code, a lot of teachers feel really confident teaching decoding skills, these foundational skills in the primary grades. And then as students move up through the grades, even by upper elementary, and I know you have experience with adult learners, they feel less sure of how to address these foundational skills. And part of it is they don't have the knowledge of the code and they don't have the knowledge in foundational skills because they're taught to teach students how to do more of that language comprehension side of the rope. But what kind of misunderstandings do you think teachers often have about older readers who are struggling to master the code?
Well, I was an English teacher before I was an investment banker, and I taught seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. And because I was a new teacher, I got all the students that the other teachers didn't want. This is back in the old days, and they couldn't read. I know that now. But I have to tell you, I taught for 3 years. I taught English for 3 years. It never occurred to me that one of the students that I had in my low level classes could not read. Because how could you get to seventh, eighth, or ninth grade? And I mean, it just wasn't in my schema. It wasn't there. When I went to the Washington Literacy Council and I met the students who didn't know how to read, I said to myself, oh my gosh, my seventh, eighth, and ninth graders didn't know how to read. So I think one of the barriers is getting people who teach, not necessarily elementary school, but starting in middle school, to understand that there are children who don't know how to read. Because if it's not in your schema, you just don't recognize it. I told parents to not give their kids so much sugar, get more sleep. And I should have seen it because they loved me to read to them. They would do anything in class for me. And yet they never did the homework ever. The kids I'm talking about. It didn't make sense to me then and I couldn't reconcile it, but oh my gosh, now I know what it was. And I want to go back and help Linda Love and Daryl and Sheldon and the kids that I remember. I want to go back and just go, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. So I think that's one of the reasons.
We've worked in a lot of schools with the middle school kids and or upper elementary. And often the kids that we find once we do assessment, which I'm sure we'll talk about, are the ones that the teachers think, well, if they just try a little bit harder. There are a lot of kids that have some decoding skills. It's not that they have none. They don't have enough. And it's enough to put a barrier there and get in the way of their ability to access the text and do their homework. And they come across as they're there, they're willing, but they're just not trying hard enough.
They also have just enough decoding skills that they can guess their way through text enough. One of the reasons they think that if they just tried harder, because you could tell that the more life experiences that a kid has had, the better he's a guesser, because the better he's able to think about what's in the text. We've had children fool us. And what we've learned is that we never, ever start to teach a student without assessment. And that's usually a formal assessment. But let's say I'm out with my friends and they say, we think that Billy here has some trouble. And I'll just start playing around with them and informally assess them. But never, ever do I make an assumption until I assess, because kids can fool you.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those behaviors, sometimes we see misbehaviors and we think, oh, this is a naughty kid. And oftentimes it can stem from their inability to read. They're masking in a way to avoid the work. And it's because they're not receiving the actual instruction they need. And I love how you talked about, how did we get to this point? You know, students get to high school functionally literate. Maybe they can get by at a primary level, but they continue to struggle. And perhaps they have had reading instruction for many, many years. Perhaps they have had reading intervention for many, many years. And why is it that you think they continue to struggle even despite all of this instruction thrown their way?
If indeed they had any reading instruction, it wasn't working, and no one said, it's not working, we've got to find something else. The first thing that needs to happen is that, first of all, teachers need to understand the scope and sequence if it is indeed a word recognition problem. They've got to understand what's easier, what's harder, what all goes in. And if they don't understand that, then they're given a program, and all they know to do is use the program. We've got to educate our teachers who are working with our struggling readers. That's one of the first things.
It's kind of intervention becomes trying to communicate with someone who doesn't speak your language and just shouting louder instead of trying to learn the language or figure out how to communicate. So they just keep doing it, waiting for it to have an effect, but it's inappropriate instruction.
I can remember going to a school and they had a decent program. I'm not going to say what it was, but they literally had students who were on lesson 3 for 4 years. Oh, well, we've been on lesson 3. We're only on lesson 3 and we've been doing this for 4 years and we keep trying. Or maybe it was 2 years. It might have been 2 years and I'm exaggerating. If it had been 3 months, it would have been, this is not working. Let's find something else. What's missing in this? Reading First had so many good effects, but one of the negative effects was teach to fidelity. Teach the program to fidelity. We don't teach programs. We do teach programs, unfortunately. We should be teaching kids, and that the program is a means to teach the child. And if it's not teaching the child, then we need something else. Kind of hammering this.
Yeah. I think also, though, Linda, sometimes it's the opposite of that, where they just plow through.
Oh, yeah.
And move to, they don't stay with something long enough, because I think that's the first place we lose students, even in kinder, is not enough practice. Some students just need more time practice with something before it becomes automatic and, mastered and in their long-term memory. And some kids need a lot of that. Some kids don't. And that's the first differentiation that needs to happen.
Well, I think it does sometimes go back to fidelity because there's a pacing guide. And
Yes.
so we have to get through this pacing guide. And Michael and I have a couple of programs we've written. And I never, ever give a training on them that somebody doesn't say, what's the pacing guide? And we say we don't have a pacing guide. We have unit checkups. You don't move on until they've mastered whatever concept is being taught in this. And that is just such, oh, really? How does that work? It's a new concept.
I always say the pacing guide is the students. You move, at the pace that the students need to move. When they have mastered something, you start something new and you keep practicing what they've mastered for automaticity. But you don't move to a new concept until they've shown that they can accurately, even if it's effortful and, with some thought, do whatever the step that you're doing is. But again, this should be all education, but we're talking here now about intervention particularly, I think. Intervention should never have pacing. That's the whole point. You're stepping outside of the general classroom to meet the kids that aren't keeping up with whatever the pacing guide is, and to make sure that they get what they need and eventually, hopefully, can get back into the pace.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were such great nuggets that you shared. And I loved that point you made, Michael, when you talked about screaming when we're not speaking their language. And it could be twofold, that we're just plowing through programs or we're not giving students enough practice. And I became a reading interventionist back in 2013. And I remember we used to have conversations with interventionists around the table and see kids in intervention from kindergarten to first grade to second grade, all the way to fifth grade. And we used to say, intervention shouldn't be a lifelong sentence. How do we get them out? They shouldn't be in intervention forever. Then we're not doing our jobs as interventionists to get them to the mainstream again.
Yes. However, I think sometimes we are so eager to get them out of intervention that we release them too soon. And my analogy for that is antibiotics. You get an infection, the doctor gives you a course of antibiotics, usually, 2 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it is. And you're supposed to take the antibiotics for the full course, even if you're feeling better on week 2 and it's a 4-week course. You need to take the medicine to make sure that you fix the problem. And so sometimes I think in our eagerness, or just the staffing issues, that we have so many kids that are needing our resources, we're a little too eager to say, yes, we fixed it. And then the next time assessments are done, oops, now you got to go back into intervention. So there's a balance there that has to be struck. And that's what assessment should be telling you. Are they demonstrating mastery and automaticity at the appropriate places?
Absolutely. And I think that's why the art of teaching is so important, and being responsive to the students in front of you. It's not always a magic formula that we can rinse and repeat for every student and in every scenario. And Linda, you talked about assessment a bit earlier. Maybe we can dive into there and address, how do we really know where these reading difficulties stem from? We have these 5 pillars of literacy: phonemic awareness and phonics and fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. How are we able to discern where to even start?
I'm going to start with how we are unable to discern it, and that is from a psychologist's report. Nothing against them. They tell us he's in the X percentile. He has a deficit in phonological awareness. They give us general areas, but I've read a lot of those because parents are very happy to give them to us. And never have I ever had one that gives me enough information to know where I need to start.
And Linda, just to jump in, I would say the same is true of some of the general assessments that are given in the schools. They give you that, is there a problem or not? But that's not enough.
And I have so many schools who use Dibbles or Ames Web. If they are in the yellow, then we're going to give this program. And if they're in the red, we're going to give this program. What that does is that assumes that there is one general problem for kids who are in yellow, which is yellow is a huge range. I mean, you can really be almost a good reader and had a bad day and really you're a good reader. Or you can be almost in red and you really had a good day and you really need a ton of intervention. So the first thing is whenever you hear screener, that is a screener. And the answer that a screener is designed to give you is the child on track or is the child not on track? The end. They give you a hint as to how far below. They do not tell you what is important. So anyone who listens to this podcast and is using Dibbles or Ames Web needs to learn how to dig further so that you can place the children in the appropriate areas. So now I've told you what doesn't work. Now I'll just start out with you need a diagnostic assessment. And I'm going to talk about word recognition because it's much easier to talk about than language. You need a diagnostic assessment that determines can they read words with short vowels, single syllable, CVC words with short vowels. Can they read? The next step would be blends. The next step would be to us, can they read are controlled? The next step is and so that you need to move up the hierarchy and figure out where they are. If they are sporadic at reading these, then we need to dive into phonological awareness. Can they blend sounds without letters? Because if they can't blend sounds without letters, they can't blend sounds with letters. That's the bottom line. And we also need to find out, do they know their letter names? And I'm going to say, I can remember being at a KIPP school in Helena, Arkansas. I loved working with this school. And they said, Linda, we've got some fifth graders. Can you assess them? I said, sure. You want me to assess them in front of the other teachers so that we can see what they have? So they brought them in. And I started out with, do you know your letter names and sounds? And the first kids knew their letter names and they knew most of their letter sounds. So they weren't about. Third kid came in, didn't know WYJG. He's a fifth grader. Now, did it surprise me? No, because I know fifth graders. Why doesn't he know J and G? Because J sounds like G. They sound alike. And then one's got to sound J and one's got to sound G, and they never get them straight out. And why do they get Y and W and sometimes V and sometimes Z mixed up? Because they're at the end of the alphabet. The name of the letter gives no clue as to the sound. They don't get reviewed very much because they are at the end of the alphabet and they aren't in very many words. So again, we need people who understand this and don't go, I can't believe I have a fifth grader who, here it is. I have a fifth grader and that's where I need to start on the orthographic side. And then I also have to test phonological. So the answer is you've got to know what to assess and then you've got to assess it. And then you start right on the verge of what they know and what they don't know. And that's where you start teaching.
And you go to the lowest skill level, regardless of age, grade. You have to go to, because all of the skills are necessary. All proficient readers had to go through the same rewiring of the brain to become proficient readers. And the science of reading now tells us what the scope and sequence is, a logical scope and sequence, and the hierarchy of skills. And that's where we see so many of the older readers are missing pieces of some of the lower level skills, as Linda said when she had her middle schoolers. I just never even occurred to me that they didn't have those basic word recognition skills to be able to read. And we do see even some of our adults, we said didn't even have phonological awareness. They couldn't blend sounds without letters, which is a pre-reading skill. It's not even a reading skill. It's a necessary skill to be ready for phonics.
Yeah, and I think this is a really helpful message for even administrators listening, because I've heard sentiments, oh, you can't have a fifth grade working on the alphabet. What a waste of time. They need to be doing XYZ to keep up with their peers. And when we understand the processes needed for reading to occur, we need to ensure that all of these foundational skills are in place. We can't work at this higher level if we do have a rocky foundation. And I love how you said we have to address all of these gaps, and it doesn't matter what the age level or grade level of the child is or adult, that we need to take a step back and make sure that we're addressing exactly what they need.
You remind me of two things I want to mention. One is you said we have to address all these gaps, but we can't address all of them at one time. We need to go to that lowest level that's missing and build our way up. And again, this is intervention. You can't do that in the whole classroom. It needs to be done in that sacred intervention time. The other is that because we need to do that, and it is different than the classroom, intervention needs to be very focused on just the skill that needs to be worked on, and it needs to be as efficient as possible. We don't have time to play games. It's an intensive pull you out to do some intensive drills or skill working to fix the problem so that you can get back in the game in a higher place.
I know you've developed tools like your diagnostic decoding surveys that can be used to pinpoint specific areas of need. So how can a teacher use either an assessment like that or something similar and interpret that data, or even things from other measures, to plan for their instruction?
With training, there is no one on earth. I was an English teacher, and people think, oh, she's an English teacher, she could teach reading. What teaching English has to do with teaching kids how to read is the same as what teaching English has to do with teaching kids to play basketball. They aren't the same at all. I knew how to teach onomatopoeia. I knew how to teach main idea. I knew how to teach how to form a great sentence, but I had not a clue that there was a long vowel sound and a short vowel sound. Not a clue. Didn't matter to what I did. It did matter for spelling, but I taught 7th, 8th, and 9th, and spelling isn't really taught in those grades. I cannot stress enough how important training is for anyone who is going to teach. And this is another thing that I think is important. We know that at least 5% of the population struggles with phonological awareness. We know that. And it might be as much as 10%. And in some dialects, it is even higher. It appears higher because it's not standard English. And then we test for standard English phonological awareness. So what I want to say, what's important about that is that we have to recognize that some teachers don't have phonological awareness, and they can't teach phonological awareness if they don't have it. We've gone in and seen that happen. And as a result, we developed an assessment to find out if you have just the basic abilities that you need in order to teach phonemic awareness, phonics, etc., without some intervention.
So to be clear, this is an assessment for teachers. We also have assessment for students, of course.
But this is an assessment for teachers. And what we found that teachers either miss 1, 2, 3, or 12, 13, 14, 15. There's no in between on this assessment. It's very obvious that you know what you're doing. And if you're wondering, what do we assess? We just say things like, how many syllables in a word? How many syllables in wishes? 2. How many syllables in boats? And some people will say 2 because they're thinking of morphemes. Then we ask, what is the vowel sound in mouth? And what is the vowel sound? Or we might even say, find 2 words that have the same vowel sound. Now, these aren't written. We speak these to them. So it's very interesting, and it's free. Anyone who wants it is welcome to have it.
Oh, that's wonderful. I actually have always thought about that as well. In our teacher prep programs, we have, teachers taking different assessments in order to become a teacher, but there needs to be some kind of standardized measure to ensure that you know how to teach children how to read. And as I get to know different people all over the globe, I've come to see that a lot of school districts have a model where they have volunteers or teachers' aides doing the interventions. And to me, the most trained teacher should be the one doing the intervention. And it's a matter of like, oh, well, we don't have the manpower, but at the same time, then we need to equip them to have the knowledge that they need in order for the intervention to even be effective, because otherwise it's just a waste of time.
I would say it's interesting because from my days all the way back at Reading First, a well-trained para, they have been my best interventionists because they come at it without worrying about what's going on in the classroom. I've seen too many interventions that are trying to help the student with what's going on in the classroom, and the student's not even anywhere near that. And the intervention needs to be where the student is, not helping them. It's like helping kids with their homework is not intervention. They need help with the underlying skills that are missing. But anyway, paras, if they're well trained, because they don't have the concerns of the classroom and the rest of what has to go on in the school day, can become some of the most effective interventionists. But of course, they need to be well trained and they need a good intervention program materials to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we can get into what an effective foundational skill intervention can even look like with older students. So are there any must-have components that you think are really critical to incorporate in your lessons? You already addressed pacing is not a thing. We look at pacing in terms of how the student is progressing along.
I don't think the answer to that is any different from what I would give you for an effective kindergarten lesson. And that is you find what they need and they practice. And I'm a talker. I mean, everybody knows I'm a talker. And yet when I work in schools, people say, what happened to you? Because when I go into model in my lessons, I'm not doing the talking. The kids are doing the talking. They're the ones who need to do the practice, not me. I guess with older students, the other thing you have to do is you have to respect them as people who understand. And I might do a little more explaining as to why we're doing something than I would if I were working with a kindergartner. But I don't do that until they let me know they need that. Well, I don't think I need to do this. Well, could you please try this because this will help you do this better? That's what I'm trying to say. The scope and sequence is the same. I'm working with a 17-year-old right now. Scope and sequence is exactly the same that I use with him. There is one difference. I think that if you have an older student who has some phonological awareness and can do a little bit of reading, they do from the beginning need to dive into text. A lot of times when I work with kindergartners, for example, I might at first only read words and read fewer, not so much sentences, where I'm trying to get to sentences with my 17-year-old, because every older reader I have ever worked with is a guesser. And it's the hardest thing I do with older readers is get them not to guess. And in order to do that, it's interesting because I hear people say, well, I got him to 90% accuracy. 90%. No, they need to be able to read CVC words with 100% accuracy. Because if they can't do that with 100% accuracy in front of me when I'm watching them, they're not going to be quite as careful when they're by themselves, and they're never going to get over the guessing habit. And it is a very difficult thing where if I get a kindergartner, rarely do they have a guessing habit. First graders often have them, but not nearly as much as, say, Antonio, my 17-year-old.
Motivation is often something that teachers are concerned about when working with the older students. And a couple of thoughts on that is, one, all students want to learn to read, no matter what age. They may tell you that they don't want to because they've been so frustrated and because they haven't been taught. And they're like, why should I try something that I can't do? But at heart, they know that they want to learn to read. Everybody wants to learn to read. They come into school wanting to learn to read. They know that that's what school is about. But if they haven't learned to read, then the system has told them that they are a failure, intentionally or not. That's what's happened. So we have a little technique we call positive error correction, and it is the most powerful motivator I know of which is simply when a student makes an error, misreads a word or gives a wrong sound or whatever, usually there's almost always something right about what they did. And if we can pinpoint that specifically and honor that by saying, it may be as simple as I asked you to read 3 words and you read 2 right. You got 2 words right. Then we can move to working on fixing the 3rd word. But by telling the student explicitly, you got 2 words right, or you got the first syllable correct, you got the consonant sounds correct. Let's look at the vowel. What you did right, particularly if they're older strugglers, they have been told directly and indirectly every time they answer something that they're wrong, even if it's just turning to the next student without saying that's right. They just constantly hear no, 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 whether it's direct or implied. And so by starting with, this is what you got right. Oh, okay. Now you're set up, your brain is set up to go, okay, let's get the rest of it right. And if we show them that we will make sure that they always finish getting the whole thing right, that's the safety zone. They know, okay, with your help, I'm always going to get it right. And that to me is the essence of making motivation, because if you're being successful all the time, who doesn't want to keep doing it?
Well, I was an investment banker. I find with older kids, rewards are also motivating. And positive error correction is just something we do. And it's for every student. Now, I don't do it so well with adults, but I'm really good with kids.
Adult students, you are.
Oh, if they're my students for reading, yes. Like when I'm teaching teachers and they give me an answer that is way beyond what I expected in just outside the zone, I kind of have to count 1, 2, 3, positive error correction, because I'm not as willing to accept mistakes from adults as from other
You have
teachers.
higher expectations for teachers.
That's just interesting. But anyhow, yeah, I think positive error correction, but I also think older students do respond also to motivation. As an investment banker, pay them. Not money necessarily, but you get cards, and it can't be long term. It has to be short term. They have to be able to know
immediate gratification.
Yeah, they're going to get something by the end of the week is probably the longest that I would go for giving an award, because they've been what they think is dumb their whole lives. And we're trying real hard to get them to know they're not dumb. They just didn't have the ability to decode. I tell them I can't carry a tune. And that's a skill, just like decoding is a skill. But unfortunately, you have to know how to read. You don't have to know how to sing. It's never ruined my life that I don't know how to sing, ever.
And sometimes just being humble. Linda reminded me the other day of one time I was in New Orleans working with high school students. And some of the guys in the class were the football players. And I'm tall, but I'm not big. And these guys were tall and big. And they really didn't want to have to do these phonics lessons. They just didn't want to do it. And so I finally had to bribe them. I said, all right, I was trying to get them to do some phonological work, actually, interestingly enough. And that was just like too goofy for them. I was like, okay, I can be goofy. You can be goofy. So if I will be goofy, will you promise me you'll try this? And so I said, okay, I'm going to tap dance for you. Well, I have never tap danced in my life. So I just got up there and, fiddled around. And of course, the humor relaxed things. And they said, okay, we'll give it a try. All teachers have tricks in their bag, and sometimes you have to pull them out. But humility and owning that you don't know everything and you're learning too can be helpful too, I think.
Yeah, those are all great. And it just goes to show that it goes beyond just the content that you're trying to share. And the motivation piece is so important, the internal motivation and the external both.
You have to build a relationship. Teaching is built on relationship. And the brain science even tells us this, that there has to be trust. And if the trust isn't there, but that's where I think things like the positive error correction and the being successful, you set up a safe environment where the student feels like, okay, you are there, you care about them, and you're there to make sure they're successful. And then you demonstrate that they are successful by doing the work at the appropriate level, where they have to struggle a little bit, but in the end, they get it. Usually, I don't know, Linda, it doesn't take more than 1 or 2 lessons to get to that point if you structure your lesson appropriately and allow the student to be successful, even if it's with your help. they finish feeling success.
And I love this positive error correction. And that's common practice. Especially Linda was talking about those guessers, the adult readers who become guessers. They see the first letter and they just take their best shot of what they think they could be. Maybe house is horse, and that's that. And you're noticing and naming, hey, you got that beginning sound right. You got that ending.
And then you make sure that they get the word correctly before you move on. You never leave an error unattended.
Definitely. And you already spoke to keeping the instruction respectful. And you think about the heavy weight that some of these learners are carrying on them, thinking that perhaps they're failures or having a very low self-esteem, being told they're wrong their whole entire lives. Like, it can be a very heavy weight on them. So what other things can teachers do or interventionists do to keep instruction respectful to that adult learner and still age appropriate so they don't feel like they're being treated as babies working on very simple skills?
I think that there is no way you can get away from you're going to have to work on very simple skills. And you're going to have to read sentences that are simple. Once they trust you, it doesn't matter that the sentences are simple. You cannot find a non-simple sentence to teach a beginning reader. You can't do it. And beginning readers come at all ages. It just doesn't happen. And that's where the trust comes. And I think sometimes what happens is that we believe that they don't want the simple stuff. And so they pick up on that we believe it. You've got to know in your heart, in your soul, in everything that this is where they're going to start and they will learn. And the minute a teacher, I've seen teachers go in and say, oh, I know this seems simple and I wish I didn't have to do it with you, but this is what you have to do. No, because now they feel like they're dumb. You have to know this is the best instruction for them and then show them that it works and that they will be able to learn and they'll become readers.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing I appreciate about Wilson reading materials. The intervention is there's no clip art, there's no colorful little baby drawings on it. It's just the words, the words and the sentences, the stories. And it takes a little bit of that primary.
Yeah. One little trick that both Linda and I think, have used sometimes with a reluctant reader in the first lesson or so is, I know that this seems really simple and you probably don't need it. So I flip further into the scope and sequence and find a really complicated sentence and then say, can you read this sentence for me? And if you can read the sentence, then obviously, we don't need to go do this other stuff. And they'll look at it and they'll go, no. And I said, would you like to be able to read this sentence? Because I promise you that if you stick with me and you start where we need to start and we build our way there, you will. I promise you will be able to read this. And sometimes that's been a little bit helpful to show them where we're going and not just put the beginning stuff down and say, well, let's start. Say, we're going to start here, but here's where you're going to end up.
I have one other thing I'd like to add to making, I don't know if we've talked about this, but effective lessons. So many intervention programs have choral reading. The main part is we'll all read this sentence together and then I'll call on people to read this sentence, or we'll read these words together and then I'll call. Our students, many of them, not all of them, but many of them who are older, learn how to memorize. And so, man, you read choral and they're going to do it beautifully because they've already heard it. The lesson should go when you're introducing something, you do an I do, you do one or two we do's, and then you call on individuals because that's the only way that you can know whether a student has mastered something is with a cold read of a sentence, a cold read of a word, a cold tell me the sounds in. And so it isn't, what are the sounds in bat? Everybody tell me the sounds in bat. Now you tell me the sounds in bat. I have no problem with everybody. What are the sounds in bat? Everybody goes at. What are the sounds in date? I call on someone else. And I'm not talking about reading. I'm just talking about sounds. Then I call on individuals for the sounds in a word. This choral for intervention teaches kids to be really good at the nanosecond repeat. And that's not just for older students, but it is especially for older students.
And our adults taught us this before we even had ever heard of I do, we do, you do. In the phonological class, they told me after the second or third night, it's like, I can't do it when it's choral. I can't hear myself. I can't tell if I'm getting it or if I'm just doing what and adults can express that. Your kids are not necessarily going to be able to tell you that when they're not getting it. Fortunately, we were fortunate to have the adults who told us like it is.
Yeah, that's really beautiful that they are able to articulate where the breakdown is for them as well. And you talked about before the importance of targeting some phonological issues with adults lacking in that phonological processing. And have you ever had experiences where they can articulate, oh my gosh, this was really helpful for me, lifting the letters away and working at the sound level only?
I will tell you that I worked, this was, 25 years ago at my dining room table. This is when I was volunteered teaching adults. And I had a special student, David, who would come over to my house and I would experiment on him. He was my guinea pig. And I'd go to Linda Mood Bell and I'd learn something and then I'd come try it on him. So when I went to Linda Mood Bell and I learned about using cubes in place of letters for sounds, I did that. And then David came back and he had a real tutor. I was just like his accessory tutor. And he came back and he said, that lesson I had went so much faster. My teacher asked, oh, what happened to you? You got really better. And then his friends started calling and asking me for those lessons without letters. They wanted some of those lessons without letters. So the adults they couldn't tell you what it was, but they knew that their learning got a lot better. So of course, we observe it all the time when we're teaching. I don't have the children tell me, oh, that was really important. But boy, David knew it and his friends wanted that kind of lesson because David was telling his friends about it.
Hot off the press. I love that. And in addition to David, do you have any other success stories of an older learner who just made such incredible gains through your systematic interventions?
Well, I have Sandra. David and Sandra were my special students at the Washington Literacy Council. And Sandra got her high school diploma. And it wasn't only but we got her reading well enough that she went and took GED classes and then was able to get her high school diploma.
And she even took a couple college classes.
Oh my gosh, she took college courses. She was a bit of a celebrity in the I learned to read as an adult community in Washington, D.C. And she was perseverant. I wish you could interview Sandra. If you could have a podcast with Sandra, it would blow your people away. And her talking about her travails.
Yeah. She's an excellent speaker, and it would be awesome. That's a good idea, Linda.
Yeah.
Like that. We don't do as much direct tutoring ourselves. We mostly work with school systems and stuff. And of course, we hear all kinds of wonderful success stories from the schools.
Yeah, I'm working with a 17-year-old right now who didn't go to school when he was supposed to the first 2 years because he was in foster care and they didn't send him to school, which I think they should be in jail for that. And so he's 17. He's a sophomore. He wouldn't have learned to read easily anyhow, but he just didn't learn how to read. And when he came to me, he could read 6 out of 15 CVC words. And I think he guessed some of those. He had just enough letter knowledge to know. And I've had 76 lessons with him in 2 years. He can read. We're still on short vowels. We're working on multi-syllable words, but occasionally we talk about other things. But his English teacher last year asked him if he had been working on his reading. She noticed it that well. He said now he will read in class when he can. So he is on his way to being a great success story. The problem is that it's just hard to find time for him to meet with me and me to meet with him, because in 2 years, we've only had 76 lessons. And it isn't, sometimes we go 3 months without a lesson, and then it's got to be consistent. That's one of the things.
Yes, especially for students that struggle and need that extra practice and, repetition. The intensity is so important. When you have an older reader that's a beginning reader, they need a lot of time and work to do that. Now, sometimes it can happen fairly quickly if you give them the intensity
And they have phonological awareness.
and they have phonological awareness. Yeah. But sometimes, yeah, they just missed a step there and a light bulb will go off. And we do have students that will
Mm-hmm.
suddenly just like, once they get the CVC, they wire their brains for the decoding at the CVC level. Then the rest of it, because they've been exposed to it along the way, the advanced phonics, they understand now how it works and their brains are able to, on their own, to become self-teachers to some extent. And then there are other students that need us to work with them intensively again and again, every little step of the way to get there. And I think the student you're working with now, Linda, is obviously one of those.
Antonio had no phonological awareness. We literally had to work on that words had parts, that there's a first sound and a last sound. We're now where he can tell you the sounds in words, manipulating them is still difficult. And so we're working on phoneme manipulation. But what I see as he gets better at phoneme manipulation, he gets better at his phonics work. And not that I didn't expect that. It's just sort of hits you every time you see it. I think another thing that Michael and I have learned is that there are a lot of people who want to call ADD the problem. Oh, this kid has ADD. This kid has ADD. And we happened to read a book by Kathy Gaither Cole, I think it's her name, something about working memory, practical
Yeah.
manual, I think it is. And we had a student who Michael was pretty sure he had ADD. I was reading the book and said, I think it's a working memory problem. And then Michael read the book and said, you're right. It's a working memory problem. And you work with kids with a working memory problem very differently than you work with kids with ADD. And with Rowan, our student Rowan, we just had to remember that there's a time in this book. It's great. They use this very technical term, zone out. And I loved it because the kid zones out and we ask a question. And for about 10 or 12 seconds, they
Because
are
we always
looking.
give time.
Yeah, you don't give them the answer, you give them time. They're looking for the answer and then they've lost the question. That's a working memory issue. And you have to quickly get them back and give them the question again.
And they can't tell you that. What Rowan would say is, I'm thinking. And the thinking that he was doing, he was trying to remember what the heck we were doing. He's lost the word that I gave him to break into syllables. He's lost the word. He's forgotten the task. But he's not going to say, I'm not sure what I'm doing or I've forgotten it. He's just going to go, I'm thinking.
And by the way, he wasn't older. He was in second grade when we worked with him, but he's in college now and he's doing very well in college. And when he was in second grade, he wanted to crawl into the dog cage because that's all he deserved was being a
He
dog.
felt that badly about himself. And he was one of those kids that clicked because he'd had a lot of intervention that didn't work. And once we got his guessing habit rewired and his basic decoding wired securely and fixed some phonological issues, we didn't do advanced vowels with him because he didn't need us.
Amazing. And so you have all of these success stories, and even with the school districts that you work with, students that you may not work with directly, but knowing that XYZ can really make reading happen for a lot of these learners. You've talked about a lot of the key ingredients today, but can you just take a moment to notice and name those things that really make success happen in these scenarios?
There's one thing that we haven't talked about that's really essential in intervention lessons, and that's patience. For true strugglers, you're going to do things again and again and again, the same thing. And you do it until you don't have to do it. And it is hard on the teacher. It's boring. And that's another thing to remember when working with the older students. Those baby sentences are boring for you. But if it's the first time that the student has successfully on his own read "The rat sat on the mat" without any help, it's not boring. Success is not boring at any level. But patience is so critical. because you got to work at the student's pace. It may not be fun. And if you're doing group intervention, the second thing is I sometimes liken that to, especially if your kids aren't particularly well grouped, which we don't encourage, but maybe if you have some behavior things going on along with your other struggles, I feel like it's herding sheep sometimes, trying to keep everybody on track at the same time. So it takes some stamina and some patience.
Yeah. And when you talk about patience too, there's also this fine dance of, do students need more practice, or is this mode of instruction not working? Like, how are you able to distinguish between the two?
Well, that's observation. That's as you're working with the student and that's where I personally find the positive error correction so powerful, because it's always, if I'm always looking for what they're getting right, it helps me figure out, okay, here's the confusion. And if what I'm doing isn't getting them to the right answer, then I need to change what I'm doing. The student doesn't need to change. I need to change and figure out. And for me, when I was first working with the adults, the way it worked for me was to think about, okay, that was too hard. We didn't get there. How do I break this down and go a half step back so that they're not having to do quite as much of the task? It's a type of scaffolding, but it's, okay, I got to give support. I didn't give enough support there, but I want to give as little support as possible to get to that success. And then we practice that until they don't need my support.
Yeah, and that it's okay to add the scaffold later, better than to over scaffold from the beginning.
Yeah, and you can go either way with it. You can, but also don't leave the scaffold in too long. Scaffolding is always supposed to go away, because I see that often. I think programs sometimes encourage too much scaffolding and don't let the students. They have to struggle a little if they're going to learn it. The student has to do the work, and the trick is to keep the struggle within the comfort zone of, gosh, that was hard, but I got it, and not, oh, that's so hard, I can't get it.
You asked, how do you know whether you need to step down a bit, and they're making, I think the kind of mistakes they make can tell you. Let me give you an example. If I am, when I'm giving a diagnostic assessment, I have kids read CVC words and consonant, vowel, consonant. Let's say there are 15 words and they get 2 right. But the only mistake they make is the vowel, so that they're getting the first sound and the last sound right, but the vowel is not correct. Then I have another student who gets, and this could be in an assessment when they're reading in a lesson, who reads 15 CVC words, gets 2 right, but sometimes misses first sound, sometimes misses all the sounds, sometimes misses only one sound. But it's all over the place. That's a totally different student than the one who's only missing the vowel sound. So I sometimes have to look at the type of errors that they're making to know whether they're at the right level. If they're making errors, they need more practice, no doubt. But if the student is making errors only with vowels, then I need to teach the vowel sounds and get them to pay attention and read those correctly. If they're all over the place, then I need to go, well, I got to find out, can they consistently identify the first sound? Can they, in a word, before I even ask them to read it? So it's not only that they can't read, it's what kind of mistake. I have teachers all the time say, oh, my kid reads at a 2nd grade level. What should I do? What the heck does a 2nd grade level mean? I have no idea what that means, because that could mean they've done a leveled reader. It could be language comprehension, even who knows? You've got to get to what exactly are they missing? What exactly are they missing? Who cares what grade level they're on? It's what are they missing?
We're targeting the skill. Mm-hmm. And I think it all goes back to that first notion when you were talking about data and assessment and making sure we're not just looking at what's right and what's wrong. Mm-hmm. Well, what was wrong about it?
Mm-hmm. And always mm-hmm. drilling down.
We had a word on some assessment. I'm trying to think. And it was something like bath. Well, if they read math, now that's one problem. If they read both, that's a different problem. And if they read tub, that's another problem. You can get just because they misread math, if they say, well, they can't even read math, well, I don't know what's wrong, because if they read tub, well, they're clearly trying to look at the language aspect of the word. It's just so interesting that you've got to be able to analyze errors. And that's not just in an assessment. That's the whole time you're teaching, you're analyzing. What are they doing right? And what are they missing? And why are they missing that?
Yeah, that's so brilliant to share. And I think a really good piece of advice for educators. And do you have any other nuggets of advice that you want to share with teachers listening who are working with an older student who's struggling to read?
If you don't know how to teach that student and you feel like what you've been given is wrong, call us.
Yeah.
We want to help. And it breaks my heart when someone has the time to teach and doesn't have the right tools.
And the desire to. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and your expertise and all your years of experience is so commendable. And I've heard you speak on different webinars as well. And just for people to know, they'd be in good hands consulting your advice and wisdom. So thank you for that. And then do you have any final words of encouragement that you want to share with educators who might think, oh, it's too late for this child. The gap is too far. Intervention is not enough.
Never. It's never
too late.
Michael worked with a little girl who's Down syndrome 4.5 and taught her mother wanted her to be ready for kindergarten. She knew the alphabet. She knew how to blend syllables. I can't remember what else she knew, Michael.
Just beginning to start blending, I think, at least onset rhyme. She got past syllables, so she was on her way.
And here's what I say. If I count Michael, because I was head of the summer reading program that he was in there, if I count Michael, and that is one of my students, I'll say I've never taught anyone younger than 4.5 or older than 81 to read. But in between that, the only people I have not been able to teach to read in that age when I've met them are they had speech issues that I couldn't understand them, and the speech issues got in the way. I think, Michael, you had a person with a stroke.
I was going to say, I've worked with some autistic students that the speech issue got in the way. I worked with a mother who could communicate with her son, and she was able to work with him. So I tutored her and she tutored him. Yeah, my first student at the Washington Literacy Council had a major stroke, and that was a limitation. We did work together, and he made some improvement, but I wouldn't say that he was 100% successful. But I was going to show up every day that he was willing to show up regardless. And we did lots of things, and I think we made some progress, and he felt satisfied that he was trying to learn to read, and that was a good thing.
It's just that the people who can't learn to read are few and far between. They're very few and far between.
Something else is getting in the way. I mean, there's a language issue where you cannot do instruction. They can't learn anything because you can't do instruction. If you can get access to their brain and they have language enough that you can communicate and they can hear sounds and you can teach them to hear sounds, then we can rewire the brain and teach it how to read.
Yeah. What a beautiful sentiment to end on, that reading is possible for nearly all learners. Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter your walk of life. I love that you've worked with even 81-year-olds. Amazing. And I think that's a huge nod of encouragement for educators listening who feel that they maybe are not equipped with the right kind of tools, but that it is possible for all of the students that we have before us. And we just have to know how to be resourceful and figuring this intervention game out to make sure that we're giving students exactly what they need. So I feel like I can speak with you both all day. You are such a wealth of knowledge. This conversation truly is a treasure to me, and I am appreciative of all that you had to share. Where can listeners connect with you further if they're interested in learning more about Readsters and your offerings?
Well, our website is www.readsters.com, and that's READSTERS. And we have free resources available on that site, along with a few products that we sell, a schedule of any place we might be speaking, and you can find out all about us there. My email address is Michael, Michael, @readsters.com. And we may not be immediate in answering emails, but we do answer emails. And we enjoy getting questions because it makes us learn and think. So feel free to reach out to us. Linda, do you want to share your email?
My email is linda@readsters.com. And the only way that I feel like I'm able to help so many students learn to read and so many teachers teach is that I get opportunities to work with the most struggling readers. And so it is very rare that I go into a classroom. Somebody will describe something and I'll say, well, last time I had this is what we tried and it worked. So it's for me, the ones that nothing is working with that are the most interesting students. And sometimes I'll be working, say I'm working 3 days in a school and I'll say, can I just stay an extra day? You don't have to pay me or anything. And you give me your most struggling readers. Let me work with them because then that gives me some experience that I can share elsewhere. What makes you good is that you've had good training, you have good diagnostic information, and it's the experience that is what you've got to have.
And one more thing, being willing to learn, because every student teaches us something. We mentioned Rowan earlier. We still talk about Rowan as being one of our best teachers because we both taught him, we tag teamed, and he had so many interesting challenges for us. We always bring him up because he was one of our best teachers, and we can always talk about something that he taught us, but all of our other students have taught us something.
He had to get into school. He had to write an essay to get into college, and he wrote the essay on learning how to read. And he was in second grade. He remembers the fun parts. We called it the torture chair. Michael called it the torture chair that he had to sit in.
It was the chair of torture.
Chair of torture. We learned how to deal with behavior. We learned so much from Rowan.
Working memory, all kinds of things.
Working memory. He was our in the flesh working memory student that looked like he had ADD.
There you go.
Michelle, you are delightful. You are Jen.
Yes, this was so much fun. We love talking about reading, obviously. And what a great opportunity you gave us.
Thank you. Thank you. And this has been such a pleasure. I was thinking too, we look at the science of reading as this body of research to inform us on how the brain is learning how to read. And Michael, before we even hit record, you were talking about how the science of learning can inform some of our instructional practices. But I love how you're ending this on how our students can be our best teachers. And that's Absolutely. Really special. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.